Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Karen remembered every incident, but in her memory, they were justified enforcement actions. She'd never seen them through the lens of the families suffering real problems. I started investigating HOA abuse as a way to process my grief, Chen continued, and I discovered something interesting. How all presidents like you, like the woman who killed my niece, you all follow the same pattern. You start reasonable, but power makes you paranoid. You see threats everywhere. You escalate until you've created the very chaos you claim to prevent. So you moved here to destroy me. I moved here to document you. The theft, the breakdown, that was all you, Karen. I just provided the pressure that revealed who you really were. Karen stared at the water, processing the weight of his words. What happens now? Now you have a choice. You can fight this, drag it out, probably lose everything anyway. Or you can resign from the HOA, make real amends to the families you've hurt, and maybe find a way to be human again. And if I choose to fight? Chen's smile was sad, but resolute. Then you'll discover I'm very good at what I do. And Karen? This was just the beginning. As Karen drove home through the darkened streets of Willowbrook, she realized that for the first time in 5 years, she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The certainty that had defined her reign was gone, replaced by a terrifying freedom. But in her rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of another car following at a careful distance, its headlights steady and patient. The booking process was a blur of fingerprints, mugshots, and paperwork. Karen Whitfield, former HOA president and terror of Willowbrook Lane, sat in a holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed with her perfectly maintained highlights. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years obsessing over her neighbor's aesthetic choices, and now she was dressed like a traffic cone. Whitfield, you made bail. Brad stood in the lobby with David Morrison, both men looking like they'd aged years in the past few hours. The ride home was silent until David spoke up from the back seat. I found something interesting about Robert Chen. He's not just your neighbor, he's a former investigative journalist, specialized in exposing corruption in local government and HOAs. Karen's blood turned to ice. What? He moved to Willowbrook 6 months ago. Bought the house specifically to get close to you. I found articles he wrote about HOA abuse cases in Phoenix, Denver, and Sacramento. He has a pattern, Karen. He targets HOA presidents who've gone too far. You're telling me this is all a setup. I'm telling you that you might have been right about orchestration. But Karen, that doesn't excuse the theft or the years of harassment complaints. When they reached Willowbrook Lane, the scene was unprecedented. News vans lined the street, reporters with microphones clustered on the sidewalk, and in the center of it all, Robert Chen stood on his front porch like a general addressing his troops, which Karen realized with growing horror was exactly what he was doing. Documented over 40 violations issued in just the past year, Chen was saying to a reporter, many for infractions so minor they bordered on harassment. Mrs. Patterson was fined for having tulips that were, quote, aggressively yellow. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd of neighbors. Karen noticed how they hung on Chen's every word, how he'd somehow become their spokesperson overnight. Mr. Chen, the reporter asked, what do you think today's events say about Mrs. Whitfield's fitness to lead an HOA? I think they say everything we need to know about unchecked power and what happens when someone believes rules apply to everyone except themselves. Karen watched from her car, trapped by the media circus that had replaced her orderly neighborhood. Her phone buzzed constantly, reporters requesting interviews, neighbors sharing gossip, and Brad's sister asking if the family needed anything. But one message stood out, from Robert Chen. We need to talk. Just the two of us. Tonight, 9 p.m. at Riverside Park. Come alone. Don't even think about it, Brad said, reading over her shoulder. This man has destroyed our lives. Why would you trust him? Because I need to know why. Karen's voice was hollow. Why me? Why go to all this trouble? That evening, despite Brad's protests, Karen drove to Riverside Park. Chen sat alone on a bench overlooking the water, his casual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like sympathy. You came, he said without turning around. Start talking. Karen remained standing, every muscle tense. Sit down, Karen, please. Reluctantly, she joined him on the bench. In the fading light, she could see the lines around his eyes, the weariness that hadn't been visible during his earlier performance. 3 years ago, Chen began. My sister lived in an HOA in Phoenix. Nice place, family-friendly, reasonable rules. Then they got a new president, a woman who started small, enforcing existing rules more strictly. But power corrupted her, just like it corrupted you. Karen started to protest, but Chen held up a hand. My sister's daughter was born with a rare condition that required medical equipment. The HOO president decided the equipment was an aesthetic violation and fined them repeatedly. When my sister tried to fight it, the woman made her life hell. Constant citations, frivolous complaints, harassment that drove my sister into bankruptcy and eventually out of her home. That's terrible, but what does that have to do with? My niece died 6 months after they moved into a cramped apartment. The stress of the move, the disruption to her care routine. The doctors said it contributed to her decline. Karen felt the breath leave her lungs. Robert, I'm sorry, but You never what? Fined the Hendersons when their son came home from cancer treatment, and they were too exhausted to bring in their trash cans on time? You never cited the Pattersons for mourning decorations after their father died. You never made Mrs. Chen, yes, she's my aunt, cry because her rose bushes were 6 inches too tall. Karen sat in her silver BMW in the mall parking garage, hands shaking as she stared at her phone. 17 missed calls from her lawyer, 43 text messages, and a notification that made her blood freeze. You've been tagged in a video. The video had already gone viral. HOAKRAN-STLs, then Skurreens, at MELCSURT, had 2.3 million views and climbing. The comments were brutal, but what terrified her more were the ones from her own neighbors. Finally caught red-handed, at Sunnybrook Resident. This is our HOA president, everyone. The woman who finds us for everything. At Tired of Karen 2024. She made my elderly mother cry over a garden violation. Karma. At Justice for Grandma. Her phone buzzed. Another call from her lawyer, David Morrison. This time, she answered. Karen, what the hell were you thinking? David's voice was tight with frustration. Do you have any idea how this looks? We're trying to defend you against harassment charges, and you get arrested for theft? I wasn't arrested, Karen protested weakly. I got away. You got away? Karen, there's security footage. The police have already been to your house. Your husband called me 20 minutes ago, completely panicked. Karen's heart sank. Brad, sweet, patient Brad, who'd stood by her through 5 years of neighborhood wars, who'd quietly apologized to neighbors after her more extreme violations. She could picture him now, pacing their pristine living room, wondering how his wife had become the stranger. Look, David continued, we need to discuss P options. The lawsuit was bad enough, but now with theft charges. Wait, Karen's voice sharpened, her survival instincts kicking in. What if the lawsuit isn't about the money? What if someone's orchestrating this? What do you mean? Karen's mind raced back to Robert Chen's presence at the mall. Too convenient, too perfectly timed. David, I need you to investigate something. Robert Chen, the lead plaintiff. I want to know everything about him. His background, his connections, everything. Karen, you're starting to sound paranoid. Am I? He was there, David, at the mall, right after everything went wrong. That's not coincidence. After hanging up, Karen drove home through side streets, avoiding the main roads where neighbors might see her. But as she turned onto Willowbrook Lane, her sanctuary became a gauntlet. Curtains twitched in windows. A group of teenagers pointed and laughed from the Martinez family's driveway. Mrs. Henderson stood boldly in her front yard, arms crossed, glaring. Karen pressed the garage door opener and sped inside, but not before seeing the crowd gathering outside the Chen house. She recognized most of them, families she'd cited, fined, and harassed. They weren't there for a party. They were strategizing. Inside her house, Brad waited in the kitchen, his usually warm eyes now cold and distant. The police came by, he said without looking up from his coffee. I told them you weren't home. I bought us maybe an hour before they come back. Brad, I can explain. Can you? He finally met her eyes. Because I've been thinking. And I can't figure out when my wife became someone who steals from stores and screams at security guards. Is this who you've been all along? The question hit harder than any lawsuit. Karen sank into the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted. I'm scared, Brad. Everything's falling apart. The lawsuit, the legal fees, our savings. So you decided to shoplift. It wasn't planned. I saw that scarf, and I thought about how we used to have nice things before all this started. Before I spent every weekend fighting with neighbors, instead of enjoying our life. Brad's expression softened slightly. Karen, we could have sold the house. We could have moved somewhere without an HOA. But you wouldn't even consider it. Because this is our home? I built something here. I created order, structure. You created enemies. His words hung in the air like smoke. And now they're destroying us. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Through the window, Karen could see 2 police officers on her doorstep. Her time was up. But as she stood to face the inevitable, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The mall was just the beginning. Check your email. A friend. Karen's hands trembled as she opened her email app. The message contained a single attachment. A photo of her house, taken from across the street, with a timestamp from this morning. In the corner, barely visible, was a figure with a telephoto lens. Someone had been watching her. Planning this. But who? Karen barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every distant car door, every notification ping on her phone sent her heart racing. At 6 a.m., she gave up pretending and made coffee with shaking hands. Brad had slept in the guest room, another relationship casualty in her war against the neighborhood. The morning news was waiting for her on her phone. Local HOA praise IDNT this spectacular fall from Grace, with her mugshot displayed prominently next to security footage of her mall meltdown. But buried in that article was something that made her stomach drop. A quote from her own lawyer. Mr. Morrison was unavailable for comment, but sources close to the case suggest plea negotiations are already underway. David was abandoning ship. The rats were fleeing the sinking vessel of her life. Her doorbell rang at exactly 7 a.m. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Henderson standing on her doorstep, but this wasn't the meek woman Karen had terrorized for years. This Mrs. Henderson stood straight, shoulders back, holding a thick manila folder. We need to talk, the elderly woman said when Karen opened the door. I don't think that's a good idea. Sit down, Karen. The command in Mrs. Henderson's voice was unmistakable. Somehow, in the span of 24 hours, the neighborhood's power structure had completely inverted. They sat in Karen's pristine living room, the same room where she'd held court during HOA meetings, where she'd delivered verdicts on mailbox colors and lawn heights like some suburban Supreme Court justice. Do you know what this is? Mrs. Henderson opened the folder, revealing hundreds of pages of documentation, every fine you've issued in 5 years, every citation, every nasty letter, every time you made someone's life harder because you could. Karen recognized her own handwriting, her official HOA letterhead. Page after page of violations. Decorative wind chimes exceed noise ordinance. Garden gnome placement creates visual clutter. Mailbox paint shade deviates from approved color palette. Mrs. Patterson's husband was dying of cancer. Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice steady but hard. You fined them for having a medical supply delivery truck in their driveway too long. The Garcias were working 3 jobs to keep their house after one got laid off. You cited them for having weeds in their flower bed. I was enforcing the rules. You were drunk on power. Mrs. Henderson's interruption was sharp. And now it's over. She pulled out a petition with 17 signatures. Every family Robert Chen had organized for the lawsuit. We're calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight. 7 p.m. Community Center. We're voting you out. You can't do that. I'm elected for another 2 years. Read the bylaws, Karen. Section 12. Subsection C. A board member can be removed for conduct detrimental to the community. I think theft and public breakdown qualify. After Mrs. Henderson left, Karen sat alone in her house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Everything was perfect: the coordinated throw pillows, the precisely arranged magazines, the carpet with perfect vacuum lines. It was a shrine to control, and it was suffocating her. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Karen Whitfield? The voice was young, eager. "This is Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. I'm Robert Chen's daughter. I'd love to get your side of the story." Karen hung up immediately, but the call had revealed something crucial. She grabbed her laptop and searched Jessica Chen Channel 7. The reporter was indeed Robert's daughter, and her bio mentioned her award-winning investigative series on HOA corruption. This wasn't just personal vendetta, it was a family business. At 6:30 p.m., Karen stood in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. She could dress for battle, the power suit that had intimidated neighbors for years, or she could dress for surrender. The choice felt monumental. She chose the suit. The community center buzzed with an energy Karen had never experienced. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls. These weren't just her immediate neighbors. Word had spread throughout the development. Faces she hadn't seen at meetings in years watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Robert Chen sat in the front row, no longer hiding his purpose. Next to him was his daughter Jessica, camera crew discreetly positioned for the evening news. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Henderson called the meeting to order. "We're here to address a motion for the removal of Karen Whitfield as HOA president." Karen Whitfield crammed the $300 silk scarf into her designer purse, while the sales associate bent down to arrange shoes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same woman who'd spent 3 years terrorizing her neighborhood over property violations was now shoplifting from Nordstrom. "Ma'am, could you please step over here?" The security guard's voice cut through the mall's ambient noise like a blade. Karen's face drained of color as she clutched her purse tighter, the stolen merchandise feeling like molten lead against her hip. "I'm sorry, what?" she stammered, her usual commanding tone nowhere to be found. "We need to have a conversation about what's in your bag." That's when Karen did something that would become legendary among mall security. She screamed. Not a gentle yelp or surprised gasp, but a full-throated horror movie shriek that echoed through the department store and sent shoppers diving behind clothing racks. "HELP. HELP. This is assault," she bellowed, spinning around wildly as if the security guard had pulled a weapon instead of simply asking a question. The guard, a patient man named Marcus who'd seen it all in his 15 years on the job, stepped back with raised hands. "Ma'am, please calm down. We just need to." But Karen was already running. In her panic, she'd forgotten she was wearing her new stilettos, the ones she'd bought specifically to intimidate her neighbors at HOA meetings. The shoes that made her feel powerful now betrayed her as she stumbled through the cosmetics department, knocking over a display of foundation bottles that crashed to the floor like expensive dominoes. "Security to level 2. Runner in progress." Marcus spoke calmly into his radio while Karen careened toward the mall corridor, her screams trailing behind her like a siren. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that Karen's shoplifting spree wasn't random desperation. 3 days earlier, she'd received a certified letter that would change everything. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association, the kingdom she'd ruled with an iron fist for 5 years, was being sued, and not just by one disgruntled neighbor, but by 17 families in a class action lawsuit alleging harassment, property damage, and emotional distress. Her lawyer had been brutally honest. "Karen, you're looking at potentially hundreds of thousands in damages, maybe more." The woman who'd once fined Mrs. Henderson $50 for leaving her garbage can out 30 minutes too long was now facing financial ruin. The same woman who demanded neighbors repaint their mailboxes because they were 3 shades too beige was stealing scarves because her legal fees had already drained her savings. As she burst through the mall's main entrance, gasping and sweating, Karen realized her screaming hadn't just attracted security. It had attracted everyone. Shoppers held up phones, recording her meltdown for social media posterity. She could already imagine the comments. Karen has complete breakdown at mall. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. The worst part was the man standing by the fountain, arms crossed, watching her with a knowing smile. Robert Chen, her next-door neighbor and the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit. The same man she'd cited for excessive garden gnome density just 2 months ago. "Hello, Karen," he said quietly as she stumbled past. Rough day. She wanted to stop, to demand an explanation for his presence, to reassert the authority she'd wielded for years. Instead, she kept running toward the parking garage, the stolen scarf burning against her conscience, and Robert's knowing smile burning even brighter in her memory. "I have something to say first." Karen stood before anyone could object. Her voice carried through the room with the authority she'd wielded for 5 years. But now it felt hollow. "You're right, all of you. I lost myself in this job. I turned your home into my personal kingdom, and I made your lives smaller to make myself feel bigger." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the defiant Karen they'd expected. "I can't undo the fines, the stress, the tears I caused, but I can do this." She pulled out a folded paper. "My resignation as HOA president, effective immediately." The room erupted. Shouts of approval, scattered applause, and in the back, she could see Brad watching with something that might have been pride. "But I have one condition," Karen continued, raising her voice above the noise. "I want to know the truth, Robert, all of it. Your daughter, your investigation, how long this has been planned." Robert Chen stood slowly. "You want the truth? The truth is, I didn't have to do anything except watch. You destroyed yourself, Karen. You became exactly what I knew you would become when given unchecked power over other people's lives. And your daughter just happened to be here with cameras. My daughter follows corruption stories. When I told her about moving to Willowbrook, she said she'd keep an eye on things. Turns out, she didn't have to wait long. So this was all a setup." "No, Karen. This was all you." The vote was unanimous. Karen Whitfield was no longer the president of the Willowbrook HOA. As neighbors filed out, chatting excitedly about election plans and rule reforms, Karen found herself alone with Robert Chen. "What now?" she asked. "Now you figure out who you want to be when you're not drunk on power over other people. And the theft charges. That's between you and the justice system." "But Karen, for what it's worth, apologizing was the first human thing I've seen you do in months." As Karen walked to her car, she noticed something different about the neighborhood. Porch lights seemed warmer. Conversations carried on front lawns. The oppressive silence she'd enforced for years was breaking, replaced by the actual sound of community. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brad. "Proud of you tonight. Come home." But as she drove down Willowbrook Lane, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. In her rearview mirror, a car followed at a careful distance, not threatening, just observing. The game might be over, but the players were still in position, and Karen was beginning to suspect that her spectacular fall from grace was just the opening act in a much larger story. After all, Jessica Chen still had a new series to finish, and Willowbrook's secrets ran deeper than just one corrupt HOA president.